Hello, my name is Andrew Grimshaw. This is the demonstration using the Global Federated File System GFFS of running a simple job. This is an illustration of the GFFS and the Execution Management Services, or EMS, working together. We're going to do just a simple job in this demonstration. Two simple ones. The first one is hostname, which is a job we're all familiar with. This is sort of the equivalent of hello world in the grid. And the second one is we're going to run a simple application where the application is not already pre-installed, and we want to copy some data files in before we run it. The audience for this series is end users at centers or campuses, research groups that want to execute jobs on the grid. And this could also include application and gateway developers who want to learn the basics of the execution management services model and how you do things. This is a hands-on practical demonstration, not an illustration of what the underlying principles are, not a discussion of basic execution services. You should definitely go to the manuals to learn about that. We're going to assume that you've properly installed the GFFS client and you have an identity. In fact, we're going to be logged in and ready to go. We're going to assume you understand the basics of the GFFS GUI. There's another one of these presentations on how to operate the GUI. We're going to also assume that you have some permission to execute on some execution management services resource. At the end of this, you'll be able to submit a sequential job to a grid queue or a basic execution service, either when the binary has already been installed or when the binary needs to be staged in. What we're going to do is we're going to start where I think everybody should start, by at least opening the manual and having it available to section E5 on how to run a job for future reference. Then we're going to open the GUI and select a resource. We'll define a simple job. We'll submit it. Look at the output. We'll open the queue manager. We're going to view the job. We're going to open it, and then once that one's all done, we'll open an existing project called Nomad. We're going to discuss what's different about it, and then we're going to run Nomad. So let's go ahead and do the first of these things, which I said was open the documentation. This is the Genesis 2 wiki. It could be going in through the Exceed wiki or another one. You want to go to the Omnibus manual, and we want to go to section E5, and I'm going to just bring that up so that you can see that all of these screenshots that you're about to see are also described in here, and you don't have to, in fact, do it all by looking at this tutorial again and again and again. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and I'm going to open the GUI. I'm going to go ahead and close these guys out because we don't need them anymore. I'm going to be creating new ones. So I'm logged into the grid, and as you can see as I scroll up here, I'm in my home directory, Andrew. I have some directories in here that we're going to be using in this demo. In all of these examples, we're going to have the output staged directly to my desktop in Virginia. I'm sitting here right now in Germany. In fact, we're going to have them go into the directory Big Deer, and then a subdirectory off of that called test. So how are we going to run a job? Well, the first step is we go down and we pick a resource that we want to run the job on. I'm using a cross-campus grid or xcg.virginia.edu resource. And in particular, I'm going to run this one on a queue. I could also have chosen to do the same thing on a particular machine by selecting a BES container, such as Alamo at Texas, or India at San Diego, or one of several. But in this particular case, I don't care which one of those I use, so I'm in fact going to use a grid queue. I'm going to use the XCG3 queue. And this queue, as we'll see in a moment, has these same resources in it. And in fact, this will be them. It's pretty much the same ones, a few different ones taken out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this, select the grid queue, right-click, and you'll see a tab called Create Job. I'm going to select Create Job, and it's going to pop open this screen. And as you can see, at the bottom it says that we can't run this yet because the executable's been left empty. There's a number of different tabs here. It's the Basic Job Information tab. tab about data and staging in and staging out, and then a description of the resources that I need to execute this. So I'm going to create a job called tutorial, and the executable that we're going to do for this one is called bin hostname. This is something we're all familiar with. If you wanted to do this yourself, you could bin hostname, date, hostname, date, whatever you want to do, and just run that. And then the data. Well, we're going to select the standard output, and we want it to go to a file called out. We could also select where we want the standard input to come from, and we could copy standard file in there to come from there, or what we want to do with standard error, etc. So this is the place where we can specify input files that we want to stage in before execution and output files we want to stage out. Now we want to stage one out. And you'll note here that it's warning us that there's no stage out for this data file that we're creating called out. And in fact, that's a good warning. So we're going to say that we're going to take this file out, and we can transfer it somewhere using one of many different protocols. We're going to use the grid protocol for the GFFS. And we're going to have this go into my home directory, which is xcg.virginia.edu, Andrew, and then we're going to send it to that big deer. And I have a directory in there called test, and we're going to call this tutorial. And that's all what we need to do there. So it saves that in there. It's going to write on termination. We only want to run this on a Linux machine. In particular, we don't care the particular version, but we want to run it on an x86. Doesn't really matter in this particular case. We could set a number of other things here, but these are somewhat more advanced. That's all we need to do. So now what we can do is we go up here, and I can save this for future use. In fact, I'm going to do that. I'm going to call this one tutorial. And then later I can just open it directly if I want to modify it. And then when we're done, we just say submit the job. So what that's going to do is that's going to submit the job through to this grid queue. And so we can see that. We're going to open the queue manager. It's going to go fetch a list of jobs that I have privilege to see. And I have a number of privileges. And in particular, we're going to see that the job is now running here. It's running on a machine called Camillus. And there's some other jobs that are in here right now. In fact, here's a job I was running earlier. We're going to remove that job because we don't actually want to keep it there. And there it goes. So this is going to run in Camillus. And so what's happened is this job has been sent to Camillus, which I happen to know is has a PBS queue in front of it. And what's going to happen is the PBS job will be submitted. It will run in the queue. When the job is finished, it will look for an output file called out. And when it gets that, it will stage it back out. If for any reason this fails, the queue will automatically reschedule it on another resource, and then, and in fact, we'll do that up to 5 times. So this is going to run, and it's going to take a few minutes in order to for everything to work through, and we're just going to stop and wait for that for a minute. While it's running, we're going to show one of the other things that we can do is we can actually go into the grid queue. And we're going to go down into the grid queue. We're going to go in the jobs directory. We're going to go into the jobs directory of my jobs. And we're going to go into the running jobs of mine. And we're going to see that I have one running job. And we can get its status. We can also go into the activity directory for this job. In fact, we can look at the working directory of this job while it's sitting there, and we can actually look at these files as they're being generated and running and whatnot. It doesn't look like this job has been completed yet. We can, there it is. It's been completed. It ran on a machine called on a node called Hermes 1, and in fact, this will now be getting staged out. And we're going to go back up, close these off. And at some point very soon, if we go up here and we go into that big deer directory, we'll see the output file. May not be there yet. We'll give it a test. We'll look and test and see if it's there. And there it is. So there's the output file. So now that the job is run, one of the things that we're going to want to do is go back to the grid queue, reopen the queue manager. At this point, the job will show up as completed. I'm going to sort these back so I can find it, and here it is. So I'm going to open it up. I'm going to look at the job history. The job history is going to say all the different things that happened to this job. I want to look at it at the trace level, and we can get all kinds of information on the job. When it happened, what are the various things, however fine in detail we wanted. So for example, we can see the queue submitting the activity. It got put into the batch system, it was queued, then it was exiting, it exited with a 0. Then we staged out, the file out was 8 bytes, it was transferred, etc. So we're going to go ahead and take that job and we're going to remove it. Take just a second. Now we're going to do a slightly more complicated example. The next example that we're going to do, close that, is we're going to do an example where we have an executable and some data files that we actually need to stage in before we can run the job. So we're going to again go to grid queue 3, we're going to create a job, and this time it's going to be a little different. In order to save a little bit of typing, I'm going to actually load an existing job that I created a minute ago. So I'm going to open a project. I'm going to be picking up the Nomad project. And if we look at the Nomad project, it's very similar to the project we did a minute ago, at least on this first page. So we see that we have a job name now called Nomad. The executable is called Nomad Orig. It has one argument called Rebo, so this means when it's executed, it'll say Nomad Orig Rebo. In the resources column, it's Linux again. Didn't put x86, we'll pop that in there. It turns out we only have x86 Linux machines in this grid right now, so that's a little redundant. So now, though, you'll notice in the data it's a little bit different. We still are staging out the output file, and that's still the same thing here. In fact, we're sending it to the same place, except we're calling it tutorial out. In fact, let's change that and call it Nomad out. Okay, so we'll say OK on that. But the big thing here is you notice that we're staging in some files. We're staging in some files, a file called Nomad Orig, which is the executable, parameter file, and 2 other data files. And if we look at these, we see we're staging them in from home, XTG, Virginia, Andrew, Nomad, params. And so I want to go back to the browser for a second and go to my home directory. So this data is in a directory on another machine that I have, which happens to be a Unix machine as opposed to Big Deer, which is on a Windows machine. This is a directory on this Linux machine that I've exported that has the files that I need in this particular case. It has the executables for both Windows and Linux. It has an input file. It has the rebo.x and rebo.d, and then the parameters file. And the parameters file tells it some things that we want to be able to change about how this program runs. To some extent, it doesn't really matter what's in this file. What matters is that it's something that this application is going to need. So what we're going to do now is we're staging in these files, then it's going to be executed, and then the data will be staged out again. So we do the same thing. We say submit, reduce this, close out. We're going to be sending it to the same directory as we did before. We're going to reopen now the queue manager, and now the queue manager, after hitting refresh, that job should pop up. It's running on Camillus again. This is going to take a few minutes. We're going to let it run, and when it's completed, we'll come back. I'm going to compress this out a little bit so that we don't have to wait for the polling interval, which is normally 5 minutes. Okay, it's finished. So if we take a look at it, we can once again look at its job history. We're going to just to see how things went on. So it's going to load the job history events. Take just a second. Then we're going to go to trace level instead of the info level. And we can see all the things that went on. In particular, we can see that it's staged in nomad.org, noman.orig, params, rubo.d, rubo.x. It created what we call the grid context to execute it. It prepared it. It ran the job exited, and then it staged the output file, which it's called out, and then it cleaned up the mess. So it all finished up, and now if we go back over here and we open Big Deer, where we put the results on my PC back in my desk in Virginia, we're going to see that, in fact, we have noman.out. It's right there. And the file contents, which we'll take a look at. Download those. And there they are. So that's the file contents and the output from this particular application. That's all there is to running simple jobs in Exceed. If you want to run more complicated jobs or see how that's done, for instance, parameter sweeps, or you want to be able to transfer large data files or binary files that you don't want to reload again and again and again, how you can save those in a scratch area, or how you might want to run NPI jobs, we'll be doing those in a subsequent video. Have a good day. Bye-bye.